And it's going to be the prophecy of Daniel chapter 9, this prophecy about the 70 weeks. And I want to take you through this in some detail because it's such a prominent and important prophecy. And we've talked about the importance of the idea of postponement and the idea of gaps in prophecies. We've talked about it in that relationship. But this is a tremendous prophecy, and I want to spend a little bit of time in it with you. So, of Daniel, the book of Daniel, chapter 9, yes. There you go. Yeah, you're welcome. You ask and you shall receive. Now, it says the 70 weeks prophecy, and they also have the word weeks in quote marks. Because when we think of the word week, we think of 7 days. So, weeks. They are periods of 7, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. This all has to do with Israel's chastisement of 70 years. It's a chastisement because this is the second phase of Deuteronomy 28 curses for Israel. And we started out with a discussion of Deuteronomy chapter 28 and this sequence of 3 cycles of judgment, the second of which was deportation into a foreign land. And Israel found itself in deportation, first carried away by Assyria, and 100 years later, the southern kingdom carried away into Babylon. Daniel was brought into Babylonian captivity probably in the year 606 BC. And he had spent now 70 years, almost 70 years in captivity, when he was given the vision of Daniel chapter 9. Daniel 9 can be dated to 538 BC. And I want you to, I'm going to do this one just a little bit different. And I'll bring up my Bible here. And let me come here to Daniel 9. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of Median descent, who was made king over the kingdom of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, observed in the books the number of the years which was revealed as the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet for the completion of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. And we know when the first year of Darius was. He was a Persian ruler. His reign is well recorded by historians, and we know when the first year of Darius's rule was. So for that reason, we can date Daniel chapter 9 to the year 538 BC. Daniel was taken into captivity probably in 606 BC. The Babylonian captivity took, and several minor waves of deportations from the land of Israel to Babylon. The first major wave was in 606 BC. There was another in 597, and then a third in 586. So Daniel in captivity was counting the days. Well, at least he was counting the years. And when he read Jeremiah, he understood from Jeremiah's prophecies that the captivity would last a total of 70 years. So if he's counting the years from 606, that would put him like 68 years in captivity in the year 586 or 538 BC. If it was 597 or 586 BC that he's counting from, maybe a little bit shorter, but still, if the total captivity lasts 70 years, he knows it's going to be over pretty soon. God's going to deliver his people. They're going to get out of this dungeon, out of this prison in Babylon. They're going to be able to go back home. And that is actually going to happen. So, okay, why 70 years? We're going to put this picture together for you in a minute. But But the 70 years of captivity was due to the neglect to obey God's command to give the land a rest every 7 years. It's called the sabbatic rest. So part of the law of Moses says when you go into the land and you settle and you start farming, you can farm a plot of land for 6 years. But in the 7th year, you have to let it lie fallow. You don't plow it. You don't plant anything in that 7th year. You just start working the land again. And we know agriculturally that makes sense. You can deplete the soil of the important nutrients, and if you let it rest for a year, it can build up those nutrients. Again, you can have a good, healthy farm. But that was the law. But the children of Israel got greedy, and they didn't want to let the land lie fruit and get more produce off of it. Produce to put on my own table, produce to sell to my Gentile neighbors, make some little bit of cash off of them. And so we'll just do that. And God might have told us to let it rest, but, that's okay. I don't have to obey everything in the Word of God. If I keep some of it, maybe God will turn his head and not notice if I violate this. Well, God did notice. God noticed that for 70 periods of 7 years, Israel had not given the land its sabbatic rest. So he said, okay, I'm going to take you out of the land, going to bring you into Babylon, and for 70 years, 1 year for each of the 7-year periods, the land's going to get the rest that you stole from it. And so 490 years, 7 times 70, that's the reason for the 70 years of Babylonian captivity. And Daniel's plural, and he mentions specifically Jeremiah. So what was he reading? We know exactly what Daniel was reading. He was reading from Jeremiah chapter 25, verses 11 and 12. And here it is. This whole land will be a desolation and a horror, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. That's the 70 years. Daniel read it, right? Reading another prophet. Daniel was not only a godly man, he was a man of the word. He was a man who knew the word of God. He read, he studied the word of God, he paid attention to it. Jeremiah said 70 years, and Daniel says, all right, I'm going to take out my pocket calendar and count up the number of years. Hey, we're almost there. 70 years. Verse 12, then it will be when 70 years are completed, I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, declares the Lord, for their iniquity and the land of the Chaldeans, and I will make it an everlasting desolation. Jeremiah 29, verse 10 was another verse that caught Daniel's attention. For thus says the Lord, when 70 years have been completed for Babylon, I will visit you and fulfill my good word to you and bring you back to this place. 70 years. And at the end of 70 years, you're going to come back. And Daniel's a pretty old guy by this time. I don't know that he was all that thrilled about the thought of a long journey back to Israel. And we don't have any sure record that Daniel himself personally did come back. But the rest of the Jews in captivity, they were able to come back. And they came back. They came back sometimes in droves. Well, Daniel said he had read in books, plural. So what else was he reading to explain the 70 years? Well, I think he read Leviticus 26, verses 33 to 35. Here it is. You, however, I will scatter among the nations, and I will draw out a sword after you as your land becomes desolate and your cities become waste. Then, look at this, the land will enjoy its Sabbaths, all the days of the desolation, while Sabbaths. All the days of its desolation it will observe the rest, which it did not observe on your Sabbaths while you were living on it. So as I was explaining, every 7 years they should have given the land the rest. They didn't. So God says, okay, 70 years. And he read also a few verses later in Leviticus 26, this part. If they confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their forefathers in their unfaithfulness against me, I was acting with hostility against them to bring them into the land of their enemies, of their uncircumcised heart, become so that they make amends for their iniquity, then I will remember my covenant with Jacob. Which covenant would that be? That's the Abrahamic covenant, right? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. So then I'll remember my covenant. They've been out of the land. God says, if they humble themselves, if they confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their forefathers. Why their forefathers? Because their forefathers were the ones that violated the Sabbatic rest. So if they confess their own sins and the sins of their forefathers, then I'll remember my covenant with Abraham, and I will bring them back into this Abrahamic land grant. Verse 42, I'll remember my covenant with Jacob, I'll remember my covenant with Isaac, and my covenant with Abraham as well, and I will remember the land, for the land will be abandoned by them, and will make up for its Sabbaths while it is made desolate without them. They, meanwhile, will be making amends for their iniquity, because they rejected my ordinances, and their soul abhorred my statutes. Yet, in spite of this, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not reject as to destroy them, breaking my covenant with them. Notice it doesn't matter how disobedient Israel becomes. God says, I'm not going to leave them. I'm not going to forsake them. Israel's my firstborn. Israel's my kid. And they might rebel against me, but I still love my children. And I will not forget my covenant with them. And so it is with us, too. You know, if we're born again by faith in Jesus, we should remain faithful to God, shouldn't we? But do God's children sometimes rebel? Yeah, they do. They do. God doesn't reject us. He might discipline us. He disciplined Israel. And he disciplines his children today. And sometimes that discipline brings them back and they're faithful witnesses. Sometimes that discipline results in God saying, time for you to come home. This is why in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, when Paul is talking to the church about their unfaithfulness with regards to the Lord's Supper, he said, for this reason, many of you are weak and sick, and some have fallen asleep. So these were God's children that rebelled in the church of Corinth, and God disciplined them, sometimes to the point of death. So there are some people who say, I think wrongly, that if you're a child of God, if you're born again to faith before you die, that doesn't seem to be borne out in Scripture. And it's based on a misinterpretation of something that Jesus said. Jesus said, he that endures to the end will be saved. That's talking about people who are living during the tribulation period. And if they live until the end of the tribulation period, they'll be saved, not in the sense of getting saved, but they'll be delivered. Delivered from the tribulation period into the kingdom. And there aren't very many who will endure to the end. Most of the saints during the tribulation period will meet death by martyrdom. But Jesus said some will live to the end, and he who endures to the end will be saved, delivered into the kingdom. They'll be the people that will go on and perpetuate children in the kingdom. Anyway, that's a tangent. That's a rabbit trail. But I just wanted to make the point that God disciplines his children. But he loves them. He loves them. That's why discipline, as we were saying, means the 70 years of captivity. He was discipling them so that he could bring them back into the land. Now, where were we? Verse 44, yet in spite of this, when they're in the land, won't reject them. Verse 45, but I will remember for them the covenant with their ancestors, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt in the sight of the nations, that I might be their God. I am the Lord. These are the statutes and the orders of Israel through Moses. So, if they confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their forefathers, then I'll remember my covenant and bring them back. Okay, let me take you back to Daniel chapter 9. Now watch this. Verse 2, he says, in this year, Daniel, I observed the books, plural, number of years which was revealed to Jeremiah, 70 years. Verse 3, so I gave my attention to the Lord God to do what? To seek him by prayer and supplications, with fasting and sackcloth and ashes. And I prayed to the Lord my God, and I confessed, sorry about that. I confessed, there we go. And I said, Alas, O Lord, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant and loving kindness for those who love and keep his commandments. We've sinned, committed iniquity, we've acted wickedly, and we've rebelled, even turning aside from your commandments and ordinances. If you read this and of repentance, earlier today we were looking at some of the penitential psalms. This is like a penitential psalm. But Daniel's not just praying for his own sins. He's confessing the sins of his ancestors, those who had violated the Sabbatic rest, those who were responsible for these 70 years of captivity. So as you keep that in mind then, we come back to, so what did Daniel expect? He read in Jeremiah, or in Leviticus, if you confess your sins, then I'll bring you back into the land. So Daniel thought 70 years were almost up. I better start confessing. And he did that. And he expected that God now would be able to bring in the Messiah's kingdom. That was what he thought would happen. What he didn't realize, so what Daniel learned is based on a vision that the angel Gabriel gave him, a prophetic message really, at the conclusion of his prayer. Let's come down to verse 24. I want to back up just a couple of verses. I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my God in behalf of the holy mountain and my God, while whom I had seen in the vision previously came to me in my extreme weariness about the time of the evening offering. And he gave me instruction. And he talked with me. And he wants you to see this. I have now come forth to give you insight with understanding. At the beginning of your supplication, the command was issued, and I have come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. You want to know how long it takes for an angel to get from heaven to earth? Well, you just read the prayer of Daniel. When Daniel started praying, Gabriel was commanded to come to earth. And when Daniel was done with his prayer, the angel appeared. He said, now I'm here now. So that's how long it takes an angel to get from heaven to earth. So that's kind of a sidelight, but I find that interesting. And he gave me instructions, verse 22 says, and he talked with me, and he said, Daniel, I've now come forth. Verse 23, at the beginning of your command, at the beginning of your supplications, the command was given. Now I've come. And here is the prophecy. 70 weeks. 70 sevens, literally. The word week is the word shavuah, which is the Hebrew number 7. And it's in plural, so 70 shavuahs, 77s have been decreed for your people, your holy city, to finish transgression, make an end of sin, make atonement for iniquity, bring in everlasting righteousness, seal up the vision and prophecy, and anoint the most holy place. Okay. Yeah. Yes. 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 He was praying on behalf of his people. He was confessing, of course, his own sins, but he was confessing the sins of the people of Israel and the ancestors. And now, since that's what Leviticus said I have to do, I'm going to do it, and God's going to respond by remembering the covenant, bringing us back into the land, and then we can have the kingdom. That's what Daniel expected. Now, verse 20, go ahead.
So that was a expectation for Daniel.
Yes.
But it was an unrealistic expectation.
Yeah. Well, maybe it was a realistic expectation based on what he knew. But God is going to tell him something he didn't know yet, something that had not yet been revealed. So now there's new information. This next slide I've titled, What Daniel learned. So we come from what he expected to what he learned. And he learned something from the angel Gabriel. That's verse 24. What Gabriel tells him is this: 70 sevens have been decreed for your people and your holy city. So why were they there for 70 years? Because of 70 sevens in the past. Those sevens were sabbatic rests for the land. Now what's going to happen? You're going to have to wait 77s before something comes to pass. And so again, I had to look at this carefully because I worked a lot on this slide, and I think this is really cool graphics, but here we go. This is what Daniel learned. There we go. It's going to be another 77s before the Messianic kingdom comes. Okay? And according to verse 24, there are 6 things that will be accomplished by the end of the 77s. So, and when the 77s are completed, that will bring to completion the national transgression, to make an end of transgressions. And this transgression is the transgression of the nation. Now, according to the law of Moses, every year at Yom Kippur, the transgressions of the nation were covered over for 1 year. It was just temporary. It only lasted for a year. Next year, during the 10 days of awe, you examine your hearts, think of what you need to confess before God, and the high priest can do it all over again. Repeated year after year after year. The author of Hebrews points to that and says, with Christ, that's all done away permanently, once for all. Doesn't have to be repeated forever and ever. There's coming a time for the nation of Israel when their national sins will be taken care of once for all. In the meantime, they're doing the Day of Atonement once a year. But there is coming a time in the Messianic kingdom when that will be done, completed. So, another thing, to make an end of daily sins. Okay? So, what about Israel? Are they all going to be saved? They're all going to be saved. They're going to make an end of daily sins. That's going to happen. Amazing. We've never seen that among a people. Even in the church, we still commit sins daily. But Israel's going to be a kingdom of priests. And when the kingdom comes, this is going to be like nothing you've ever seen. There'll be an end of daily sins. They'll make an atonement for the sin nature. Now that atonement, we know from our perspective today that occurred on the cross. That atonement was paid. Okay? From Daniel, it's all future. He hasn't seen it come yet. Daniel, you got to wait. That atonement for sin is going to be part of this fulfillment of these 77s. Next, number 4, to bring in an age of righteousness. So that age of righteousness is the Messianic kingdom. Can't get it yet. It's going to be 77 before that comes. It's going to cause a cessation of oral and written prophecies. So Daniel himself was a prophet. And there were other prophets that would come after Daniel. And we've got the apostles and prophets of the New Testament. In the tribulation period, there'll be prophets. 2 prophets in Jerusalem. 144,000 will be prophets. And there'll be other prophets. Your old men will dream dreams. Your young men will see visions. According to Joel chapter 2, there'll be the gift of prophecy again. But when the kingdom age comes, the Messiah, according to Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, is going to be a wonder of a counselor. No one will need to give counsel because the Lord himself will give wisdom from the throne of David. He will be the one who is giving the word of God. He is God himself speaking. He is El Gibor. He is the mighty God, everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And so no need for prophets because God himself is dwelling among his people. And he's giving the law from Mount Zion. So a cessation of the oral and written prophecies. And then lastly, to anoint the most holy place. Now that most holy place is the Holy of Holies. The holy place in the temple. The temple will be desecrated during the tribulation period by the Antichrist. But when the Messiah comes, he is going to anoint the most holy place, and the temple will be clean, be pure, it'll be a place of worship of God. And it'll be almost a parallel to what happened with the Maccabees when they rededicated the temple after they defeated the armies of Antiochus. But it's going to be 77s, Daniel, before this. You can't have it quite yet. Thank you, Daniel, for praying. That's a wonderful thing, and that is going to result in the people of Israel returning to the land, but it's not going to be the kingdom yet. 77s. So let's take a look at these 77s in more detail. And with a special focus on the first 69 of them, and then we'll turn our attention to the 70th seven. So the first 69 sevens are broken down into two groups, 7 sevens and then 62 sevens. Let me come back to our text here. Verse 25. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. So notice you have what's called a terminus ad quem. That's a beginning of the countdown. And that can be counted from the issuing of a decree, and it is a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. So if we can figure out what that decree is, we know when to start the countdown of 7 sevens plus 62 sevens. So some of you that are good at math can figure out what 7 plus 62 is. Okay, so we've got the first 69 that's going to leave 1 week, 1 7 still to be completed. But 69 of them up until Messiah the Prince. This is what it says. 7 sevens and 62, and it will be built again. It, meaning what? The holy city, Jerusalem. Jerusalem will be built again. The Babylonians destroyed it, but it's got to be rebuilt. Ezra and Nehemiah were what? They were builders. Ezra and Nehemiah built the temple first, and then they built the city walls. That was Nehemiah's job. It will be built again with a plaza and a moat, even in times of distress. Okay, so come back to our diagram. 7 sevens plus 62 sevens, a total of 69 sevens, or 483 years. Now, the decree, the countdown, there's been several theories about what decree started the countdown. So Cyrus gave a decree allowing the Jews to return, but it had nothing to do with rebuilding the city. He just said, I want you to go back and I want you to reestablish the worship of God there. There were some other Persian rulers that gave them permission to rebuild the temple. But Daniel says specifically it is a decree that involves the rebuilding of the city of Jerusalem. And that decree does not come until Artaxerxes gives that decree in Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 8. Now, I'm not going to take the time to turn there. You can look that one up yourself. But we can date that decree to 444 BC. So, beginning in 444 BC, you start the countdown. The clock starts ticking. It's going to be 483 years until Messiah the Prince comes. Now, we have a little bit of a complication because the calendar, of course, was not like our calendar. We know there are 365 days in a year, and that's how we count it. The calendar of ancient times was a lunar calendar. Each month was a cycle of the moon, which is about 28 days. And so if you have 12 months of 28 days, you fall short of a whole year. So they did that month after month after month, but after a while they saw that their seasons were getting out of kilter, and fall wasn't coming when they expected fall. So they would throw an extra month in to make that up. But basically, the old view of the calendar was that a year consisted of not 365 days, but 360 days. Now, if you do all the computations and the calculation of these 483 years, you count those years as 360 days each, and then you make the conversion to actual years of 365 days plus however many hours, which is how it works out. And these computations have been done. There's an excellent book. The author is Harold Hoehner, Hoehner, Harold Hoehner. He authored the book, Chronological Aspects of the Life of Christ. And these calculations were first done by Sir Robert Anderson, but he was off in a few details. But Harold Hoehner has revisited the calculations, worked it out, and it's amazing that to the very day, because we know the day that Artaxerxes gave the decree, to the very day, the day that Christ entered Jerusalem on the donkey was 483 years from the issuing of that decree. It is one of the most exact and precise and amazing prophecies in all of the Bible. And it's quite something. So why does it break it up into 7 sevens and 62 sevens? That's a good question. We understand why 69 sevens. That brings us up to Messiah. But mention is made of rebuilding the city of Jerusalem. And it probably took those 49 years, 7 sevens, for after Artaxerxes issued the decree until the city was sufficiently rebuilt with walls and gates and defenses. So the first 7 sevens brings us up to the completion of the city. The rest of the 62 sevens brings you to Messiah the Prince, and he enters into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey. People all reciting Psalm 118, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hoshiana, Hoshiana, save us now." And they wanted the kingdom then, but it didn't come because he was rejected by their rulers. Okay, that's the first 69 sevens. Brings us up to Messiah the Prince. Now, after the 69 sevens, very interesting wording here. What? 483 years, so the 69 sevens. 60. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, now, verse 26. Then, after the 62 weeks, okay, 7 plus 62. So after the 62 weeks, so we're now after the 69th seven. So on the 69th, Jesus enters Jerusalem. Now what's going to happen after that? Okay, after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off. Crucifixion, right? Okay, so it sounds like he's going to be crucified now during the 70th seven, because that happens after the 69th. Anybody can figure out the 70th comes after the 69th. All right, Messiah is going to be cut off, and he'll have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. So the city's going to be destroyed after the 69th seven. Now, Daniel was living back when he was living. He knew that Rome was coming because he had been given that vision, but he hadn't seen it yet. You and I are living in the year 2025. We can look back and we know when Jerusalem was destroyed. It was destroyed in the year 70. Problem: the year 70 is actually more than 7 years after the triumphal entry. So what's going on here? How can the destruction of the city come after the 69th seven and not be like during the kingdom? And not only that, not only will they destroy the city and the sanctuary, halfway through verse 26, notice, and its end will come with a flood, and to the end there will be war. So after the destruction of the city, there's going to be war. And it says desolations are determined. So let's come back to our diagram. So we've got the 69 sevens, Messiah the Prince comes. Now we've got this last seven, and we've got a problem, because after the 69th seven, Messiah is cut off, but then you've got the destruction of Jerusalem in the year AD 70, And after the destruction of Jerusalem, continuing wars and desolations. And something is going on here. The only way you can explain this is by seeing one of these gaps in prophecy. And that 70th seven is projected into the future. So we have seen 69 sevens. We have not seen the 70th seven yet. It is yet future. And it is a 7-year period of time. And it's from this passage that we ascertain that the future tribulation period is going to be a 7-year period of time. Okay, you with me? Okay, so there's a gap in between the 69th seven and the 70th seven. Again, some people say, oh, how can you have gaps in prophecy? Well, again, we went back, we saw this, both the principle of postponement, that's a biblical principle, and gaps within prophecy. We see that in a number of places in prophecy, and it is here also. So let's take a closer look now at the 70th seven of Daniel's prophecy. So that gap will come to an end at some point. It might come to an end tonight. If I keep being as long-winded as I am, it might come before I'm done. But the gap is going to come to an end at some point, and there's a 7-year period of time left. So we have this reference in verse 27 to a firm covenant made with Israel. Let's take a look at verse 27. Notice one thing about verse 26 first. Verse 26 says in the middle of it, the people of the coming ruler will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Now, who destroyed the city and the sanctuary? The Romans, right? The Romans did. So it says the people of the coming ruler will destroy the people, the city. So who's this coming ruler? He's a Roman ruler. A Roman ruler. His people destroy Jerusalem. But there's a coming Roman ruler. What did Nebuchadnezzar see? He saw 4 successive kingdoms. The last kingdom was Rome. What did Daniel see? He saw 4 successive kingdoms. The 4th one was Rome. And it's the Roman ruler, as the people of the Roman ruler, that are going to destroy the city. Well, that happened. But there's still a future Roman ruler who is coming. And notice what it says about verse 27. He, referring to this Roman ruler, will make a firm covenant with many for 1/7. This is what begins the last 7-year period. It is the confirming of this covenant. Now, we don't know exactly what that covenant's going to be. It's future. We can speculate. It appears to be a covenant made between the Antichrist and Israel that assures their peace. It might allow them permission to build the temple, which they've been wanting to build for some time. It might be something else too. But the Antichrist, this Roman ruler, is going to make a firm covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, okay, what's the middle of 7 years? That's 3.5 years into it. In the middle of that 7, he will put a stop to the sacrifice and offering. And the abomination of desolation will be on a wing of the temple until the decreed destruction is poured out upon the desolator. Now there's the prophecy. So we're looking at this last 7-year period. And first of all, it begins with this covenant. Halfway through, we find a cessation of the sacrificial system. Now this is the strongest evidence that the covenant itself allows the rebuilding of the temple and the beginning of sacrificial system again. But that is brought to an end at the midpoint, dividing that last 7-year period of time into 2 halves of 3.5 years each. And it is interesting because we read elsewhere in Daniel and then again in the book of Revelation about 2 periods of time during the tribulation period known as 1,260 days in Revelation 12:6. Given a 360-day year, 1,260 days is exactly 3.5 years. Revelation chapter 11, verses 2 and 3, and Revelation 13, verse 5, it refers to a period of time of 42 months. This is the period of time that the two witnesses are prophesying in Jerusalem. Why 42 months? 42 months is 3.5 years. And in Daniel itself, in Daniel chapter 7, we didn't read this part of it when we were in Daniel 7, but it refers to time, 1 year, times 2 years, and half a time, 3.5 years total. So this is confirmed as a legitimate way to view this cessation, this violation of the treaty at the midpoint of the 7. It divides the tribulation period into 2 halves of 3.5 years each. So Revelation 12:6, we just had reference to that. Then the woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she should be nourished for 1,260 days. That makes sense, doesn't it? If the Antichrist violates his covenant with Israel, and at that point starts persecuting Israel, then she's going to need protection for 1,260 days. And her place in the wilderness, we don't have time to go into all the details of this, but that is a place down in the southern part of modern-day Jordan called Petra. It also goes by the name of Bozrah. And it figures into many of the prophecies of the future. Actually, when Messiah returns to the earth, he comes to a place called Bozrah, and there he delivers the remnant of Israel. But we deal with the gap because 3 things take place after the 69th 7. The cutting off of Messiah. Now, the cutting off of Messiah came just a few days after he entered Jerusalem. The cutting off of Messiah. Okay, the crucifixion. So that could theoretically have happened during the 70th 7. But he also says after the 69th 7 will come the destruction of the city. That actually came more than 7 years after the triumphal entry. And so if the 70th 7 followed without a gap, you'd have the destruction of Jerusalem taking place during the kingdom, during the Messiah's kingdom. That's absurd. You wouldn't have Jerusalem, the holy city, being destroyed in the Messianic kingdom. And then after the destruction of the city, you have continuing wars and desolations. So these 3 things have to happen after the triumphal entry. Therefore, that 70th 7 has to be projected into the future. Make sense? Kind of? Well, think about it. Yep. Okay, ruminate on it. That's good. Chew your cud a little bit. The woman will be persecuted for 1,260 days, and she'll seek refuge. And she'll seek refuge in a place prepared for her by God at Bozrah. Revelation 11, verses 2 and 3, where John is told now to measure the temple during the tribulation period. And watch this. Leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the nations, and they will tread underfoot the holy city 42 months, 3.5 years. Now, look at this. This is the conclusion of a period of time, the times of the Gentiles. Times of the Gentiles is when Gentiles have dominion over the holy city and over the Temple Mount. And Revelation tells us that for these final 42 months, the Gentiles are going to tread the court of the temple. And this is when the Antichrist makes the tribulation temple his headquarters during the last 3.5 years of the tribulation. Verse 3, and I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for how long? 1,260 days, 3.5 years, clothed in sackcloth. Revelation 13:5, there was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act how long? 42 months was given to him. So this is the Antichrist himself. He's allowed to have authority to carry out his nefarious activities for 3.5 years. For the first 3.5 years, he's palsy-walsy with the Jews. He lets them have their temple. He lets them have freedom. He protects them. Midpoint, he turns against them. He violates his own covenant with them. He enters into the temple, and for 42 months, he has authority, and he's going to be a persecutor of the Jews for the last 3.5 years. And this agrees with Daniel 7. This is Daniel's vision of the four beasts. He, this little horn, he will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One, and he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hand for times, and half time. For 3.5 years, then, the Jews being persecuted can be given into the hands of the Antichrist, and they're going to be martyred right and left all over the place. It'll be horrible, horrible persecution. It'll be worse than the Nazi Holocaust. So we have this 70th seven then divided into two halves of 3.5 years. So we see the firm covenant starts it. 3.5 years later, we have the cessation of the sacrificial system. We've got this 3.5-year period by these different designations. The last 3.5 years will be marked by the worship of the Antichrist and his idol. According to Matthew chapter 24, verse 15, it is the Antichrist who causes an abomination on the temple. And 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 3 and 4, when you have the Antichrist actually entering into the holy place of the temple and showing himself, displaying himself to the whole world, claiming to be God and demanding the whole world worship him. And Daniel 12:11, Revelation 13, verses 14 and 15, all these have to do with the activity of the Antichrist relative to the tribulation temple, dominating that during the last 3.5 years. Matthew 24 says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, then let the reader understand. Let those who are in Judea flee into the mountains. That's in the tribulation period. When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of through Daniel the prophet, what is that abomination? We know that it is an idol that is placed into the holy place. Now, the back part of the temple on the west side is the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was, but the front side of the temple on the east side was called the Holy Place. And the Holy Place had the table of showbread, and it had the menorah, and it had the altar of incense. That is the very place where Antichrist himself will show himself, and when he's not able to be there, there will be an idol that is crafted by the false prophet and animated even to appear to be alive, and it will stand in the holy place. And that's where it'll stand. Remember I said you could stand on top of the Mount of Olives and look down into the holy place of the temple? And that idol will be visible. They may have television cameras up there on Mount of Olives to show the world what that looks like. I don't know how they're going to do that, but that's possible. 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 3 and 4. Paul says, let no one deceive you in any way, for it, and the it here refers to the day of the Lord. That's what we were talking about last session. The day of the Lord will not come unless what? First comes the apostasy. Different views on that. That might be an apostasy of the church age. It might even be a word that refers to the departure of the church from the earth, a reference to the rapture. So that's another discussion for another day. But whatever the apostasy refers to has to happen before the day of the Lord comes. And then, next thing, the man of lawlessness is revealed. The man of lawlessness is another title for the Antichrist. How is he revealed? He is revealed when he makes a firm covenant with the many for 1/7. So at the confirmation of a 7-year treaty with Israel by the Antichrist, he is revealed for who he is, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship. And watch the last part of verse 4. So that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself himself as God. And then Daniel 12:11, from the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished, all right, that's the midpoint of the tribulation period. From that time, and the abomination of desolation is set up, there'll be 1,290 days. Now that's your 3.5 years plus another 30 days. Okay? And between the second coming of Christ, bringing the tribulation period to a conclusion, between that and the official beginning of the 1,000-year kingdom, there's some administrative setup that needs to take place. There's cleansing of things that have been defiled. There are other things that need to take place. So there's actually a 75-day gap between the second coming and the official beginning of the kingdom. But that's the reason why it's 1290 instead of 1260. Revelation 13, verses 4 and 5, he, the Antichrist, deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was given to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast, who has the wound of the sword and has come to life. And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. That's that idol set up in the holy place. That then is this last 3.5 years. We have the worship of the Antichrist and of his image. We're out of time. Let me just suggest to you that this covenant, if you want to learn more about it, Isaiah has a whole section dealing with the same covenant. To Isaiah, it is referred to as the covenant of death, because that's exactly what it is. It's a covenant made with death. You can look at Isaiah chapter 28, verses 14 through 22. It's a covenant that the leaders of Israel make actually with the Antichrist. And God has said an overwhelming scourge has come across Israel. That's the tribulation period. And they think that they can escape this overwhelming scourge by making a deal with the Antichrist. That's this covenant with death. And this is really the last straw for those leaders of Israel. That'll be kind of the political leaders, maybe the prime minister, whoever that might be at that time, the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. They're going to make this covenant with the Antichrist, a Gentile leader. Maybe he's going to offer them a superior kind of weaponry, aerial defense system. Maybe the thing is going to cause them hope for peace, finally. It's all going to look very rosy and very good, but from Isaiah's perspective, it is a covenant with death. So, folks, it's been a wonderful time with you. It's been a whirlwind tour trying to go through a survey of all the Old Testament in 3 days. But I think we did okay. There's a lot we skipped over, but we covered a lot of territory, didn't we? Yeah.